Well, thanks everyone for coming along to this special event. It's a big production number. This is an event of the Centre for Social Impact and Danjoo Cooling. And online we have around about 200 and it's increasing by every second. So we're going to combine the two. We've got the physical face-to-face and a really huge audience around Australia and around the world as well. So welcome. I think before Richard does the welcome, I'd just like to say that we've got some special people in the house today, including important elders. We've got Clive Morrison and Jim Morrison, for example. Jim, you know, as the original founding member of Reconciliation WA and also the inaugural chair of the WA Stolen Generations Alliance. So welcome there. And Kim Beasley, good to see you again. Now, Kim's most important position is as ambassador for Danjoo Cooling. But apart from that, Kim, of course, has been Governor of West Australia and leader of the Labor Party and the opposition. So welcome, Kim. And we also have a number of people who've been involved or were involved in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. A special mention to Nolan Hunter, Tyson McEwen, Sophie Collin, and Daniel Morrison as well, who were actively engaged in the Uluru dialogues. And we know that when the Prime Minister made that election speech, he said that we were implementing the Uluru Statement from the Heart. And of course, the voice is a critical component of that. So he is a man of his word, I know him well, and we are seeing that in the referendum today. Well, the session today is on the referendum on October the 14th. So welcome everyone online, welcome everyone here to this special event. And I'd like to begin by inviting Dr. Richard Walley to give the welcome to country. Thank you.
Kerala, ngala jurp jenang nanak jenang ngamaja puja ngala mot puja, nama jenang ngala nangen wangin kada jenang wangin kaiwa. Bawberawan nanak wot kono nakalak nanak puja nanak mot, mama jenang nanak jenangen kada jenang puja, wiran puja, the puja in the bilya, ngala koro mot, yai mot, budawan mot puja kaiwa. So welcome, this is called the Whadjuk section of the Noongar language group. We ask the Good Spirit and our ancestors to watch over people during this process. May the Good Spirit give those who are presenting the ability to articulate the message. Those who receive a message have the capacity to pass it on to those who require it and who can enact it. And at the end of this presentation on this country, which is by the river, we call it a learning place, a Karajan place, it's a spiritual place. May the Good Spirit take each and every one safely back to your workplace, and at the end of the day, safely back to your families. May the Good Spirit be with us. Bye.
Thanks, Richard. Welcome to country. And as you know, Richard is also co-director of Danjoo Cooling. So just to let you know how we're going to run the event, we have two special guests who I'll introduce in a second. And those in the live audience, after both have given an opening address, can ask questions. Now, those online, there's so many of you, 300 odd, that we decided to create a different platform. So you've been given a link to Slido. Hopefully you know what all that means. You were sent an email early in the day for that. So you'll be invited to upload questions and to vote. Your first practice in terms of voting leading up to the referendum in terms of questions for the panel. So we'll try and get both sides involved in this. But let me introduce our two special speakers and panelists today. First of all, Carol Innes AM. Carol is a Noongar woman with connections to Wilman, Whadjuk, Balladong and Wadani people. She is obviously a co-director of Andrew Cooling, co-chair of Reconciliation WA, a board member since 2016, and there are a lot of other credits to read off as well. Board member for Screen West, North Metropolitan Health Service, where she does an incredible amount of work helping to address health disparities, one of the points of the voice, and manager of Aboriginal cultural heritage and arts at the Metropolitan Redevelopment Authority. And let me turn the page. It goes on, but I won't list everything, Carol, because there's a lot here. And our second special guest is Glenn Kelly, OAM, a proud Noongar man from the Southwest, over 25 years of experience in Aboriginal affairs, native title development, Indigenous land management and the like. He is a current member of the National Native Title Tribunal since November 2022. And those who remember or have read about the 1967 referendum will know that the Native Title Act wouldn't exist if we had not had a yes vote in the 1967 referendum. The 1967 referendum, as you know, abolished a racist component in terms of the Commonwealth making acts for Aboriginal people. So the Native Title Act is one of the many important acts that came from that yes vote in 1967. But to just continue on, Glenn, Glenn was Chief Executive of the Southwest Aboriginal Land and Sea Council for nearly a decade, and was a critical negotiator for the Noongar people with the WA state government to achieve the Southwest Native Title Settlement, the largest of its type in Australia, and a great testament to your work, Glenn. So let me now hand over to Carol and Glenn. Carol's going to start us off with a few words, and then Glenn with a few words, and then we'll get into a nice panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone who's in the room with us today and those that have joined us online. I also too would like to acknowledge those in the room with John, Clive, Paul and Ringo. No, just kidding. Sorry, John, Clive, Tim and Alan, David, and also thank Richard for his beautiful welcome, and also Gail Barrow, who's in the room with us as well. And I'm happy to have you here as our bookends for the conversation, I think, that we're about to embark on today, and also to our ambassador, Kim Beazley. Thank you for being with us today. And for those who are online who have been a part of our journey, it is a little bit hard for me today when I think about what I do and what I'm doing in reconciliation and through the Andrew Cooling movement. And, you know, as part of my life as a young person growing up in a small country town and to what we are encountering on In the Voice, it's like we have a million miles from where I first started a journey of separation. And I think we're heading back into that as part of this conversation when we should be thinking about how much it brings us all together. So as Andrew Cooling stands for, bringing people together and walking together, reconciliation, bringing people together on a one-line movement of recognition, respect, opportunity and responsibility, I feel a bit heavy in heart. So I'm just putting it out there. Heavy in heart, mind, body and spirit. And when I think about this process, where I'm coming from as a grandmother of 11, mother of 3 and a stepmother of 4, and all my extended family, I think about, did we think that we're going to have to get down to one vote for us to be recognised as people who are deserved of respect and recognition in this country? One vote for the whole nation to make that decision for us. We don't. We are strong, proud and survivors. The resilience of our old people has been phenomenal, that I can sit here and Glenn can sit here and say who we are and where we come from. Whichever way it happens, and we're not going to say yes, no or otherwise, The journey of where we're going in the next few weeks will be hard, and it's hard on many of us now. My week is full. My week is full of talking and sharing. How many of you have to stand up and share how great it is to be who you are? The strength of where you've come from. That's what our mob are doing at the moment. And I stand with my hand on my heart to every Aboriginal person who is standing strong and delivering with their heart, their minds and their passion about where we stand as Aboriginal people in this country and how deserved we are of the recognition that has been ignored since 1901, since 1788, since 1829. So that's where we're heading on a journey for people to decide where they are. And this week, reading in the paper, a young man's 18-year-old talking about where he's going to put his first vote as an 18-year-old in support of the yes vote was a very commendable, articulate approach to what we're on about. So, like Glenn, I've had a long time working in Aboriginal affairs, working for my people, looking for the strength of who we are, standing in the middle, working on both sides. And I think that's what our people are doing at the moment, standing strong and tall to say, regardless of what happens, we are still here. It'll still not change many people, but the divisiveness is the stuff that will remain, the stuff that hurts. And I guess that's the journey we're going to be heading into pretty intensely over the next few weeks of this campaign. And we'll talk more further through. So I'll hand over to Glenn.
Thanks, Carol, and I trust this is working. Yep. First of all, acknowledge everyone in the room. Yes, a lot of people in this room who I very much admire and respect and have looked up to for many years. Also, Richard, thank Richard for the welcome to country and acknowledge the Whadjuk people who are the traditional owners of this country, and of course the traditional owners of country wherever people sit who are linked in. And Danju Quilling for the event. I guess my focus on Carol's quite right. This is as we sort of expected. It's turning into a very difficult time and process for Aboriginal people across the country, where permission in many respects for all of those really terrible arguments and misdirections and various things about Aboriginal people has been given to be spoken, and out they come again. And in many respects, it's no different from what might have happened 50, 100 years ago in terms of the sort of the dialogue. In fact, many of the things that people are saying now are exactly those things that were said all that time ago, as is shown by the record at the time in debates like this. But I wanted to, I guess, just have a look at, what's proposed. How big really is it, and is it justified? And so I thought this morning, well, I haven't. I used to have a copy of this in a little tiny booklet, the Australian Constitution. And I remember when I first got hold of it, I thought there was a mistake because it's so small. That can't possibly be the constitution of a country. Yet it is. A lot of people obviously know that already, but there might be some people who are unaware that it's not a particularly imposing document. It's pretty short. And really what it is a set of rules for the Parliament and how it will run, the establishment of the judiciary, the powers of the Parliament, and a few other things like that. It doesn't really contain a lot aside from that. Now, if the question that we're being asked is also quite a simple one, and the question is, just let me drag this out here. On referendum day, voters will be asked this: a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve of this proposed alteration? And then there's the insertion of section 129 into the Constitution. In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the First Peoples, there shall be a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. The voice may make representations to Parliament and Executive Government on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The Parliament shall, subject to the Constitution, have power to make laws in respect to matters relating to the voice, including its composition, its function, and its powers. So they're the words that are proposed to be put into the Constitution. And I guess my comment, the reason why I'm sort of highlighting that is because based on everything that we've heard, you wouldn't think that that's what it is that we're making a decision about. You would think that there's something perhaps quite a lot different to that. Such has been the narrative and the dialogue in the country. So recognition of Aboriginal people as the First Peoples, number one, a constitutionally enshrined voice, number two. That voice shall have the ability to say certain things to the executive and the Parliament. Number three. Number four, the Parliament makes the rules about how it comes together, right? That's it. Well, it's really interesting, the sort of dialogue, because, you know, the question arises, well, how could that be justified? For people like myself, it's self-evident, but I guess if we go back to pre-European times, across the country, we have a great many nations of people who have their own territories, their own laws and customs governing society, land, the ownership of land, and the transmission of that land through the generations. And we know that to be the case because, you know, we know those laws within our own country here in the southwest of WA. In my job, I routinely, and I'm talking about all the time, am mediating disputes on customary law surrounding the ownership of land, right? So these customary laws existed and still exist. So then Europeans came, set up several colonies, and there was a phase, I suppose, of frontier expansion and violence, which resulted in people being removed from country, placed onto reserves, and a whole lot of other things occurring, right, in various different stages through different parts of the country. And then in 1901, the country decided that the colonies would form a commonwealth and become states. And in many respects, that's a social contract moment for everyone else. So the people of Australia, those who were eligible to vote, because not everyone was eligible to vote, even in the non-Aboriginal population, those who were eligible to vote entered into effectively a social contract of this is how we will be governed. But Aboriginal people weren't considered as part of that. In fact, Paul, as you've highlighted, the Commonwealth were very specifically excluded from making laws about Aboriginal people in what we now know as the race power, and the remainder of the race power is still in the Constitution. It was also, I should add, there was another part which said, in reckoning the numbers of the people of the Commonwealth or of a state or other part of the Commonwealth, Aboriginal natives shall not be counted. All right. So Aboriginal people were very specifically excluded from that social contract which formed Australia, despite having pre-existing nations, pre-existing laws and customs, pre-existing territories, and pre-existing rules about the passage of that property through the generations. Unlike, say, New Zealand, who said, we will enter into a treaty, and as a result of that treaty, we're imposing this form of government, but you'll have a part of it by having established seats in the Parliament. That's an oversimplification. I know there'll be a whole lot of people saying, no, that's not exactly, but that's the gist of the principle, right? So in that jurisdiction, there was the formulation of a new type of government, style of government. The Indigenous peoples of that country had representation within it. In Australia, nothing. Now, in 1960s, we go forward through the native welfare era, and the states, remember, the Commonwealth does not have the power to make rules and laws about Aboriginal people. That's in the state, at the state level. And that's what empowered the states to create the native welfare laws in order to remove children, put people on reserves, do all of those sorts of things. I guess there was a bit of a common sense developed towards, 50 years later, when people thought perhaps this is unjustified and maybe we should do something different. And there was the 1967 referendum. The 1967 referendum removed that part about people being counted in the census. So by, I guess, in effect, people became citizens of the country, and it removed that part of the race power which said that the Commonwealth could not make laws about Aboriginal and people. The race power still remains, of course. But it's sort of interesting here and interesting now is that, that was a really good thing to happen. That referendum in 67 and the results of it were really great things to happen. But again, it was by the grace of everyone else in the country. And these things are only sort of granted by the grace of everyone else in the country. Aboriginal people then, in 1901 in the 67 referendum, had no voice in it, right? And so we've come along many years hence, and really what happens now is the focus is on, much of the focus is on those things that government do in policy and legislation which have an impact on Aboriginal people. And there's no voice, there's no influence. So from my point of view, the reason why there is justification of having a constitutionally enshrined voice is because it, at least in a very, very small way, enables us to participate in that social contract, which is the Australia that we now know. Because currently and still, people, in many respects, Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islander, sit outside of that. The system is not designed for or with Aboriginal people. Everyone sits outside of that. So in a very small way, it allows people to have part of that social contract, to be recognised as pre-existing owners, as having bodies of law and custom and ownership and all of those sorts of things, to be brought into the system of government, but in a very, very limited way, in a much, much more limited way than, say, occurred in New Zealand, for example. And so my point here, and I know I'm talking for a little bit here, but my point here is that even though it's a reform, it's a very modest, in reality, it's a very modest reform. It's really saying, Aboriginal people, we know all of that stuff happened in the past. We're not going to give you representation, but we will give you an instrument which provides some influence only over the things that impact upon you. Okay, I mean, I say it's limited, and that could be construed as negative, but I'm a believer in iterative change. So I still think that it's quite significant and very positive, and could lead to many, many good things. So I don't mean that as a criticism. I guess it's really interesting though that we get to this point in terms of the way that I think about it, that we have nations of people who are not part of the system of governance that exists in the country. There's an opportunity to have a very small part of it and to be brought into that system. But again, it's by the grace of everyone else. It's by everyone else's permission, so to speak, which I think exactly highlights some of the points that I've been making about not being part of the social contract. And to me, that's a really important bit of this. So there's a lot more to unpack here, but I'll end up there. That's some of the reasons why I think it's very much justified, aside from the other obvious things like way better policy making, savings in money. We've got huge closing the gap targets in which things get dreamt up and don't necessarily work. We've got all sorts of different policy, financial and political reasons why I think this is a really good idea, but we'll move into them, no doubt, as we travel along in the conversation.
Fantastic. And before we get to questions, Carol, would you like to expand further as well?
I think a big part of this process for me has been that whilst we've all had all different experiences growing up, we've all had different opportunities. Our destiny is all different as well. But I think about the people who never had the opportunity to even consider being a part of the voting, the conversation, and this space that taught us why we stand and still be part of the fight for change and recognition, and we want to do things our way for our people and by our people. And I think of the people who've given so much time to that, especially Stolen Generation. My mum and her family were a part of the Stolen Generation. The voiceless people, that's one generation away from me. So this becomes a very big impact for families. Some people who may not even want to even buy into this, because we're dealing with different issues that the voice doesn't, that people don't have the comprehension of what the voice actually means, because people are dealing with many of issues today that have been a result of generational trauma. And, and we're also dealing with so much pain and grief in our community that it just becomes swinging doors to pain and think about what else do we need to manage. And I saw it just recently in Brewell. We were in there last week and being a part of a workshop, but people weren't talking about the voice or anything else. They were worried about their business and how they want to manage and improve their business, to educate non-Aboriginal people about who they are and where they come from on country. And being proud of that knowledge that they've collected from people and using culture as the basis for who and how the business operates. So it is really hard. It has been hard on me. It's been hard on my spirit. But I look around the room and I see Jim, Alan, Clyde, and John, Gail, all the work, and Richard as a colleague, as a brother, working hard for change to educate people to say, it's time. It's time enough. And we don't want this to be another divisive process. I remember the native title stuff. We were in native title. He's still in native title. I'm still as part of the whole process of the outcome. But the scaremongering that happened with native title was just ridiculous. This went even into the church groups and everything we're talking about all of this. And I've got to go into the church on Sunday again. I feel like I'm back on the native title journey for change again, to, this form of education. I want non-Aboriginal to stand up. I want you as listeners to be a part of the voice for change. Not us all the time, because we can tell you our pain and our story. I think it's time this voice changes its tack. I don't want government to run the campaign. I want you to run the campaign. I want you to be a part of educating your families. And I was thinking, if we've got 400 people online, 4 times 10, because you could tell 10 people, God, look, we're massing the numbers already. I want you to be the educators for change, because it's time that we, as Aboriginal people, not saying, what about us? What about us? Because this country is under the microscope internationally. This country is being watched by many people across the world. And, to hear the leader of the opposition, I can't even mention his name because I feel like, what planet did you come from? To say he wants to put another referendum in place? How many more referendums we have to talk about us all the time? I think the time is now for us to be considered with humility, with passion for change, but to also show to our people in this nation, across the country, that we are worthy. We are the first Australians. We are the first peoples of our own nations. And those nations were already here. We knew which country to travel across, the rules that we had to abide by. That was all just taken away from us. We've been forced into a system and we want you to help box us out of it. We don't want to keep fighting. This is not a fight. This is not a fight. This is time that we come together as a nation to recognise the most beautiful place. We as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have held this country for so long. Less than 200 years in this state, our people have held this country, looked after these waters. This country has been ours since time memorial. So this is time for your head and hearts to connect, to make a difference, to be a part of the change. So whichever way you vote, think about it that way. You know, we can't keep going on a referendum change to say, should we let them in or should we not? Keep them in, keep them out. It's not about that. We contribute to the wealth of this nation. We contribute to the economy. We work on the social justice stuff that helps our mob move through the systems. We've got immense number of professionals across every genre we can think of jobs and everything else. And our people have it in us to help contribute to the change and contribute to matters that are going to affect our people across all sectors. Let us be a part of that through this voice.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Glenn. So I'm going to open it up to the audience now. Online, you've been given instructions about how to get a question to us via Slido, and I'm sure we're working on that. Barbara is looking at some questions right now, but we're going to go first to someone in the audience here for the first question, Jim, and Donna's got the microphone.
Look, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Glenn. I felt I ought to say something because my name's been mentioned a couple of times. Look, I'm a bit worried. I guess I'm getting depressed. I think I'm tired of being kicked around like a political football. And I say that because 50 years ago, I helped set up the first voice in this country. That was the National Aboriginal Consultative Committee. And I've been involved in every voice since, driven by government. The time has come now where this work and the ease of my depression is community driven and enshrined in the Constitution. So it's a no-brainer. I am worried about a lot of our people seeing the awful stuff that's in the media. I worry about the depression, and I think a psychologist a couple of months ago, there's 150 psychologists Aboriginal in this country. Only 50 of those are men who raised the issue about our social and emotional well-being and the onus and responsibility for us to keep on standing up has got to stop. So I don't really have a question, but it is, how do we support our First Nation people to get through this? I've discovered my Irish ancestry. If there's a no vote, I'm going to move to Ireland.
Just a quick comment, and then we're going to go to our first question from the online audience.
Thank you, Jim. I think on that, there has been another plea from Aboriginal psychologists and psychiatrists around the well-being of our people, because it is wearing, it is draining. I know what I'm feeling myself. It does take a toll on us, and not as though we don't want to shy away from it. I mean, to get up and stand up and be a part of this, it's the love of the people that I look around in this room that I know who have done all of that before, through education, through the work that you do, Jim, Alan, Clive, John, Richard. This is where a big part of gentleness. I hardly can read the social media stuff that goes out. I don't flick into the news. When I do, it's a bit of a cringe space. So just be mindful of all of us who are delivering this. And there's a lot of information out there. Reconciliation Australia has an amazing website. Reconciliation WA's got an amazing website where a lot of this information can be found, and to understand that. But as simple as it is, it's what Glenn and I have been talking about. It's a simple thing. And we want you to be the messages for change, I guess. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, it weighs heavily, doesn't it? All of being the subject and object of all of the conversation, if is the kindest way to put it, about this issue, is really weighing on a lot of people really heavily, and because it exposes those things in the country that have been sort of kept a little bit quiet for a while, but out they are.
Right.
But you raise another good point, I think, about why something like this should be enshrined within the Constitution, and that is because all of those several other legislative voices that you've said and you've been part of have each been dissolved by government, particularly when they began to give advice that was counter to the direction that the government wanted to go in. And that's a little bit of a problem when a representative forum as such can be evaporated on the moment that there's tension and difference in opinion on which direction to go in on a bit of policy or a program or a bit of legislation. But I think that's a very, very strong argument for why something like this should be. It doesn't mean that, because remember, Parliament's responsible for how this looks, so it doesn't mean that how it looks straight away is the same as in 10 years or 20 years or 50 years or 100 years, but it just means that it can't be done away with.
Yeah.
So,
The importance of that word enshrined in the
Yeah.
Constitution. Right, Barbara, we have got
One
the
there.
online.
A few questions from online. People. This one is Courtney, who says that there's a lot of responses coming to her that she's faced, where people are telling her that some Aboriginal people themselves don't support it. Can you comment on how Aboriginal people are opposing the voice and why?
absolutely. So about 80%, as far as I understand from polling, of Aboriginal people support this insertion into the Constitution. For the reason being is that we say, okay, well, this is the system of government that operates now, and we should have at least some sort of say in those things that impact upon us, and we should be brought into it through the Constitution. There's a large body of the, and again I say this, it's not as a criticism, it's observation. Large body of the group of Aboriginal people who don't support it because it's nowhere near far enough, right? So a lot of those members of the Aboriginal community who would say no, we don't want to do this, is because people need to speak about it themselves from this position, but reject the premise of the Parliament itself, reject the idea that Aboriginal people should be even part of the Constitution because it undermines other claims of sovereignty, or it perhaps it will impact upon the way the governance and government of the country can be reimagined properly. This is sort of going along with an existing system, whereas a lot of Aboriginal people who would vote no are saying we don't want to go along with the existing system. We want a different system. There are some people who have different reasons to that, but there's a large body of people who would simply say we don't support it because it goes nowhere near far enough.
But in this process too, it allows people to say the Voice Treaty truth was a big part of this conversation. This is about building the governance for the next step of where we need to go. And, you know, this representation, we've got to get to the representation where our people will be informing who will be a part of that change. So it's not to cancel out. Some people want to go to treaty now. Some, you know, feel that we've been ignored by that process. But I guess, you know, we're in the whim of the change of where we are at the moment.
Good. And we have another question from online.
Yes, we have a question from Alex Hughes. I'm building up to have a conversation with my family and friends about this. How do we counter the misinformed narrative that is at the moment telling us that this change will divide us as a nation? How does he counter that?
It's a good question. It's the $1 million question. I think, yeah, I mean, personally, I would like to see the Yes campaign be a bit harder in relation to some of those things as well. But, you know, there's already a race power in the Constitution. It already exists. So this idea that people are coming forward with and saying this will bring race into the Constitution are incorrect, because it's literally already there. Section 51, what is it, 36? Go and have a read yourself. Actually, I'll read it out. It says, the Parliament can, Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws for the peace, order and good government of the Commonwealth with respect to the people of any race for whom it is deemed necessary to make special laws, right? So that already exists. One of the other arguments is, why should we have a special measure for a particular group of people, a particular, you know, race of people? Well, I mean, although it was in a summary, I've sort of set out some of the reasons why I think pre-existing sovereignties, social contract, you know, bring the nation together by agreeing to this particular way of government. But also that argument comes from this idea that we're a uniform, unitary society, when we're not, very clearly. Like there's, you know, there's men, there's women, there's adults, there's kids, there's old people, there's farmers, there's business people, there's public servants, there's, you know, whatever. And there's all sorts of different rules, laws, regulations and policies which govern all of these different segments of our population, right? There's nothing in particular wrong, I don't think, with having a rule, law or regulation in the positive, which will assist Aboriginal people to have some influence in government and improve policy making and legislation. We often sort of see and again, this is no criticism, it's just an observation. Groups of people have influence over government because of the power and economic power that they yield, and can have influence over their area of business or whatever it might be. We don't, or Aboriginal people don't. And I think that serves as quite a good justification, again, for why such an instrument would be enshrined in the Constitution, to provide that voice, limited as it is, and to, you know, in recognition of the fact that Aboriginal people are the original owners of this country, were never bought into, that have a system of government that's imposed, and this is a mechanism to maybe bring Aboriginal people into that system of government.
I think there's another point too. People are asking about the detail, and as Glenn, you just showed us earlier the size of the Constitution, there's no detail about how the Parliament's going to run, how defence is going to run. That's all in the Constitution. Where's all the pages and pages and files of that? So this becomes a very misleading process. And I think, you know, there's enough information out there that you can find inside of the Voice website, the referendum. It's all information that's there. Work to the factual base as opposed to the trying to work out the what ifs and other things that people are pulling to the side, because we have, you know, we have gone, and it's not hard to see that there is a divisive space that's happening for this proposed voting period, and what, 6 weeks away now. We're going into 6 weeks, so just be informed and be gentle with your family, because I know when we were going through a lot of stuff around the native title space, you know, people were families who are defending our people through lawyers. You know, I've got a couple in the way. Wendy's up here, I can see who are there. Our lawyers and others were being attacked by their own families because they were standing up, working with our own people, you know, and it becomes a very divisive place with this. So let's not make this a rise for those who have their own things they need to deal with. We're still here. Our people are still going to be. I've got grandchildren. Oh, hopefully I'll have great. Our mob is still going to be here. We want you to be a part of the change to make this country the beautiful place which we see. Without all of that rhetoric that happens around us and about us, we know where we belong. And I think that's why I will sit here and talk to this conversation, no matter how hard it hurts my heart.
Good. So we have another question online, and then we're going to have a question in.
Hi, we have a question from Leo online. How significant do you think the no campaigns, if you don't know, vote no message will influence the result of the referendum?
I think that, I mean, for me, I don't even say vote yes or no. It's basically, you need to inform yourself. If you don't understand it, find out about it. And I think that's a big part of this. To go down that process is a very divisive and very immature message that we're putting to the people when it affects so many people that belong in this nation, that have family and connections that take us way back. So I just think that for me, I have been quite angry. I've been really, really angry. I've talked about, I mean, I had to have my debrief with Glenn before I even started this conversation, said, what have we done when we said yes, when we got asked to be a part of this conversation? But I think the anger for me has started, like, you know, being a part of the native title in Mabo. I wanted this to be back then when Mabo pushed terra nullius out and the legal framework was changed in this nation. You know, we're 32 years behind the space now. We needed this back then. And imagine how many people would have been standing strong. And, you know, this is a little bit of healing that we could give to this country that we need, because you can't talk about the truth if you keep making a divisive line.
Yeah, I've got some comments about that as well, if that's all right. Personally, I think that things like that are quite influential. We know that even in a normal election, there's actually a pretty decent number of people who don't actually make their mind up about who they're going to vote for until they're in the line at the polling booth, which is why it's so, you know, which is why you get all the how to vote cards, because they're actually quite influential. So slogans and radio grabs like that have a power to really influence people. Unfortunately, I guess, you know, we've had a sort of, you know, there's a yes campaign as well, and I've heard a number of complaints, I suppose, about misinformation and social media, and which I all think are quite true, as well as perhaps journalism not really digging deeply enough, or complaints about media. But my thought on that is, you might as well complain that water is wet, right? We know how campaigns work. We know how people utilise social media. We know that people use short grabs and the techniques that are used, like if you don't know, vote no, so that they get replayed on television and FM radio and various things. And so you've got your tradie working on a house, or you've got a farmer in a tractor, or an office worker with the radio playing in the background. That's what they're hearing, right? And so I personally, I don't think there's any, I mean, as frustrating as it is, there's no point complaining about it, because that's just how it works. And the response to it is to have a sophisticated and strong campaign which has touch points in the same places. With respect to everyone here and to everyone online, the people who are going to sort of bring this over the line aren't reading quarterly essays, right? They're not reading. They're not looking at. They're not going out of their way to find information, and they don't, like I said, all of these things about the social contract. They don't care about any of that. So, winding up the answer, I think it's potentially very influential, but there's not a lot of point sort of complaining about those campaigns. What's important is to understand the group of people that might take this over the line and engage in a campaign which resonates with them.
Good. Okay, so this is the last question, and Donna has the microphone with Mariana. So Tanja Cooling, Centre for Social Impact together there. Fantastic. What's the question, Mariana?
So this is a comment on a question, perhaps, you know, a riposte to the, if you don't know, vote no, take a guess, vote yes, I don't know, something like that. But a lot has been spoken about the insecurity about what happens and not knowing the details. Can you shed a little bit of light about the post-referendum process, assuming positively that there is a yes? What will that look like to nut out some of those details?
Well, if there is assuming there is a yes, then the Parliament will begin debating the form the voice will take. But not only, I would assume, would it begin debating, but it would be taking, it would be undergoing a fairly comprehensive consultative program across the country to understand how such a thing could be legitimate in the eyes of the people that it's giving voice to, right? And then it would necessarily need to debate that, and that would be a very public debate. All sides of Parliament would have a chance to have a great deal of influence. It would probably go off to committee in the Senate. It would have all sorts of different things happen to it. But the main point really is that there would be I think a reasonably lengthy design, consultative and parliamentary debate process. What that would yield, I don't know, because but that's also an important point, because the people in the Parliament and those who are their constituents will have an opportunity to influence what the voice looks like and how it's constituted, whether they voted no or yes.
Fantastic. So we're at the end of the session, and let me just test this out, Bruce. We've got a few. No. Underneath some of the chairs, Bruce had put this special voucher to get some of our special T-shirts. But I think we're running out of time, but we're going to hand out some of these great T-shirts to some of you instead.
Are we finishing at 1 on the dot? Because can I ask a question?
You can ask a question. Yeah.
What do you think will happen if the vote is no?
So that's a question to the audience.
in many respects, it is a test of the character of the
Oh,
country.
if the vote is no, the country's damage, it'll be a subtle subterranean damage, but it will reinforce a whole range of attitudes that people in the area have about Australia. Got to remember, we are the tail end of the sweep of European empires across the Asian region. And we are left like shags on a rock with the Kiwis. And and because everything else is gone. Last one to go is South Africa. And they just take a look at us and say, well, what right do you folk have to be the only nation on earth that has a continent for itself? Because we've got a few problems. So it would be a very bad step. We've got to just say one other thing, because you are wonderful people. Carol is, whenever Carol bleeds, all of us suffer. It has to. She's got a wonderful conscience. And Glenn's actually negotiated a treaty. Now, if you look at Glenn's treaty, you can see how very different it is from what we're talking about now, because native title is immensely more complex than this, immensely more powerful than this, in terms of its recognition of the people who actually owned the place before Europeans settled. And but it's simple. This is the most simple referendum I've ever seen. There's 3 questions. 1, if this yes vote is carried, will it in any way, shape or form or hinder the operations of the Parliament, or direct the operations of the Parliament, or override the operations of the Parliament? Answer, no. Second question, if this yes vote is carried, will it in any way, shape or form direct the executive, force the executive not to do or go in directions that the executive wants to go in? Will it amend anything that the executive has done? Answer, no. Third question, will the passage of this tie down the courts in endless litigation that will confuse the legal system and make life hard for all of us? Well, given that the answer to the first 2 questions is no, the answer to that question is no. End of story. Over. That is, people who wander around the place finding life so damn difficult with this really need to think about that. Finally, and this goes to what the rest of the world will actually think of us, is that this thing is before us. This referendum is before us for one reason. The most representative gathering of First Nations people ever held in this country at Uluru asked that the rest of us should do this. They asked for this structured voice. To refuse that is an act of extreme discourtesy. Extreme discourtesy. And if any of the answers were different from the ones I gave previously, you could find an argument on that. But you can't find an argument on it, given that all this does is extend as a courtesy from the rest of us, recognition. And with that comes respect. So courtesy and respect. That is what is entailed in what we're discussing now. Respect for people who've been here for 70,000 years at least. And everybody here who's got any form of Aboriginal descent has one thing that I don't have. They know what they were like 70,000 years ago. I don't know what I was like, but my ancestors back then were almost certainly black, because white pigmentation is a product of the last 30,000 years of evolution. So it's this is a real test of it's not really a test of the country, it's a no-brainer. Can we do no-brainers? Possibly not.
Right. So that is a good way to end. And so thank you, Kim. And I would end where I began, which is that these kinds of votes make a difference. And said that we wouldn't have the 1993 Native Title Act without the vote in the 1967 referendum. And we need to think positively about the positive change that will result from this vote on October the 14th. Now, I'd like to end with a special gift. Here we are to our beautiful panel members. Fantastic. Okay, so thank you to the CSI UWA team and Andrew Cooling, who've done so much to get this working. It is, in fact, incredibly difficult to do live face-to-face and live online at the same time. So well done to everyone, including getting Paul Kelly onto the onto the video as well. I believe that this will be something that you can watch later. We will pass that link on to you so that you can all watch it. And Glenn mentioned Carol mentioned the 4,000 from the 400. It's actually 500 when you include everyone, but 5,000 from 500, that can make a real ripple effect and real difference. So thank you, everyone. And thanks everyone online too. Thank you. And t-shirts for everyone. Wow. In the room. Sorry. Sorry, t-shirts for everyone in the room. We absolutely cannot do the online. So thank you.